squat. I'm just gonna show you the basic body weight squat, meaning you don't have any weight that you're working with except yourself. Now, as you get stronger, you might wanna progress, holding a medicine ball, holding a weight, or even holding your kid, anything that's gonna add weight to your legs. This is predominantly a lower-based exercise. So you're gonna focus on your quadricep muscle groups, your glutes, your hamstrings, your whole posterior chain. Basically, all the muscles of the lower body are going to be working in this exercise. You wanna start with your feet probably about shoulder width apart. If you're more comfortable a little wider or even externally rotating your feet a bit, just find a place that's comfortable for your hips and make sure that your knees always track. A good rule of thumb is to think about your knees going right in between your big toe and your second toe. So when you're doing the squat, just watch out that your knees are not adducting and collapsing in or abducting and going out. We want to try to maintain the knee in a neutral position. The wider you are too, the easier it's going to be to balance. So if you have stability issues, start wide. If you want to challenge the stability, then you bring your legs a little closer together and challenge your core muscles by challenging your balance. So standard squat, shoulder width, something comfortable. You're going to imagine like you're sitting back into a chair. So lengthening your spine, reaching your hips back, bending your knees, and then exhale to come up. You're always going to inhale as you lower your body, and you're always going to exhale as you lift any weight, and in this case the weight is your body. So exhale, pull the abs in and come up to vertical tall spine. My tips for the squat, again, aside from the knees, is what's going on with your spine. I'm going to show you from the side. So if you're facing side, you could look at yourself in a mirror and watch your positioning if that helps you when you're first learning. But same thing, sitting back, like you're sitting back into a chair, and watching that your spine is neutral. So that means I'm not doing hyper extension, and I'm not doing excessive flexion. I'm just trying to be right in between. You have natural curves to your spine, so you want to maintain those, but nothing excessive forward or backwards of that. And then just as many reps as you can do, maintaining good form, breathing in on the way down, exhale on the way up, targeting all the major muscle groups of the lower body.
Properly perform a squat. Start with your feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart. Cross your arms in front, so touch your right hand to your left shoulder and vice versa, pointing your elbows straight ahead. Now from here, shift your weight to the ball of your feet and bend your knees. Get as close to 90 degrees as you can, looking straight ahead. And from here, push back up to the starting position. This is going to be great for strengthening your thighs or your quadriceps, as well as your butt or your glutes. And it's also going to be great to work on your posture. That's how to properly perform a squat.
You want to get yourself underneath the bar and in the proper bar position, whether it be low bar or high bar. You want your feet completely under the bar. Remember, your midfoot is your center of gravity. When you're ready to squat, take a large breath in, brace your abdominal wall, and unrack the bar. The easiest way to do this is to squeeze your glutes forward, and this will simply pop the bar right off the rack. I recommend against quadding the bar out of the rack. That is simply where you bend your knees and try to use your quads to take all the weight. Use your biggest and strongest muscle groups, your hips, your lower back, your hamstrings, and your quads to unrack the weight. Most of you out there are probably used to a high bar position. A high bar position is where the bar sits on top of the trapezius muscles. A low bar position is where the bar sits about 2 inches lower on top of your rear delts. So what are the advantages and disadvantages to each? A high bar squat usually makes it easier to stay in a little bit more upright stance for some people. It also is a more comfortable position. A low bar position is a bit more uncomfortable because your shoulders are bunched up. But one advantage to the low bar position is that around 95% of people are going to be more powerful in this position and able to use more weight. Now they will start out with a little bit more forward lean, but when they get to the lower part of the squat, they'll be able to keep more spine neutrality than people who use a high bar position. So why is it easier to keep better spine neutrality with a low bar position? Because the bar is further away from your pivot point, your hips, there is more torque on your lower back when you hit the bottom of a squat. By using a low bar position, this reduces the amount of torque on your lower back. So how do you know which one is better for you? I recommend trying both. But in general, people with shorter legs and longer torsos are going to be more able to use a high bar squat position. whereas people who have longer legs and a shorter torso are probably better off with a low bar position, as this will reduce the amount of torque on their lower back when they lean forward. So how do you find where to put the bar during a low bar squat? Grab the bar relatively narrow as you comfortably can. Put it on top of your traps where you'd usually keep it. Then simply slide it to the next shelf down. You'll feel the bar catch, and that is your low bar position. Now that you've unracked the bar, you're ready to walk out. I like the 3-step walkout. It's efficient, simple, and repeatable. Once you've unracked the weight, let it settle. Don't immediately start trying to walk backwards. But when you're ready, take a small step with one of your feet backwards. Once that foot is set and settled, then take another small step backwards with your other foot. That second step actually plants your first foot. Then, with your other foot that you took the first step with, take a small step back to line it up with your second step. Once your feet are in position, you can adjust your stance width slightly. Again, I don't recommend a super wide or super narrow stance. I recommend a stance that you would be in if you were going to do a standing jump. The last thing I want to talk about is toe point position. You don't want too exaggerated of a toe point. If you're anywhere near 45 degrees, it's too much. But an easy way to find out where you probably should be, once you're in your squat stance, squeeze your glutes and your feet will rotate naturally. Wherever they wind up, that's probably your optimal position for your toe point. Now you're ready to squat. The first and possibly the most important aspect of squatting is simply breathing. Most people don't take in near enough air. So the first thing you want to do once you're in position is take in a deep breath, as much air as you can get. If you do not breathe deep enough, you cannot brace as hard, and thus makes it more difficult to maintain spine neutrality during a heavy squat. Now many of you have been told, breathe in on the way down on an exercise and breathe out on the way up. It's completely wrong. You can generate your most force when you're holding your breath. Now what do I mean by bracing? I'm not talking about flexing your abs. I'm talking about once you pull your air in, push out your abdominal wall as much as you possibly can. If I was going to throw a punch and hit you in the stomach, what would you do to prepare for that? You would brace. You want to do the same thing when you squat. Many people just say, just arch your lower back. But that's the wrong cue when you squat. Your abdominal wall is what stabilizes your lower back. Yes, you want your lower back neutral, but just simply arching will not be sufficient to keep it neutral. You want to make sure you're bracing. Taking in a deep breath and pushing out your abdominal wall as hard as you can will not only protect your lower back, but it will also help keep you more upright in the squat. Most people think about the squat as simply an up and down movement, but it's not. It's also back and forth. You want to start the squat with your hips. You want to start by driving your hips back and sitting down between your legs. This is the best cue I can give you. By using your hips and glutes, you're recruiting your biggest, most powerful muscle groups and joints. Once you've achieved depth, if you're braced correctly, you should start to come up on your own without even having to think about pressing. But as you start coming up, don't think about simply just pushing up. Think about also driving your hips forward and squeezing your glutes as you lock out. Even if you're halfway up in a squat, you can lock it out simply by driving your hips forward and not even having to think about drive up anymore. Now that we've talked about what to do to the hips and glutes, what do we do with our knees? As we begin to sit down in between our legs and drive our hips back, we also want to drive our knees out slightly. You want to make sure that you're driving your knees out over where your toes point. So if your feet are pointed forward, your knees should mostly track in that same line. If they're pointed out, you should push your knees out slightly, tracking them in the same line as your feet. One of the things you don't want to do is have your knees shoot forward, however. One of two things typically happens when you lead with your knees in a squat. One, because you're pushing your knees out further, your calves tighten and it causes you to have to fold forward in order to achieve depth. This increases the likelihood of spine flexion much more. The second thing that happens is because their calves get tight, people sense this, and they stop well short of parallel. In order to maximize gains in strength and hypertrophy, you want to take yourself through a good range of motion. By keeping a more upright shin angle, this is going to help save your knees and put less torque on them. We talked about squeezing our glutes forward. One benefit of this is this pulls your glutes into alignment with your spine and also pulls the bar completely into alignment with your body. Now your lower back isn't just supporting the bar, your entire skeletal structure is. As you finish the movement, lock your glutes out so it pulls the bar back into alignment again. The last part of the squat execution is talking about back angles. As I alluded to earlier, back angles are going to be very individual. One of the things I hear a lot is people telling other people that they should squat more upright. And while it's true, you should squat as upright as you reasonably can, that is going to be different for every person depending upon their structure. For somebody who has long femurs and a short torso, they're going to need significantly more forward lean to achieve depth and keep the bar over their midfoot. For somebody with shorter femurs, they may be able to squat very upright with very minimal forward lean. The most important part, regardless of how much you lean forward, is making sure you maintain spine neutrality. I've talked a lot about this term, but let's discuss it briefly. Spine neutrality essentially means that your back is straight. Even if you're leaning forward slightly, your back is straight. What you don't want to have happen is go into flexion. Flexion is where you lose the neutrality in your spine and you cave forward. That is dangerous because it places uneven pressure on the discs in your back. Now we're going to get into actually what makes a good squat. The number one thing is making sure you get deep enough. Proper depth means your hip joint will go slightly below your knee joint. I think you should squat as deep as you safely can. For some people with longer limbs, they're not going to be able to go all the way down without losing neutrality in their spine. In that case, they should stop before they get to that point. But almost everybody can learn to do a good parallel or below squat. The next thing we're going to talk about is bar path. The bar path is the path the bar takes as you travel down and up during the squat. The proper bar path is going to start with the bar directly above your midfoot, and it should stay as close to the center of your midfoot as possible throughout the entire movement. That way, the bar is directly over your center of gravity, and you get the maximum force transmission from your feet to the bar. Now, even with a really good squat, you may not have a completely straight line, but the fewer deviations from straight you have, the more efficient the squat is going to be, and the easier it's going to be. This brings me to another point. I hear a lot of people say, never lean forward on a squat. And while it's true you should keep your back angle as upright as possible, this is going to be different for every person. If you have long legs, in order to keep the bar over your center of gravity and achieve proper depth, you must lean forward. Now you want to minimize that amount of forward lean, but you're going to have some. Leaning forward in and of itself is not inherently dangerous. The key is to make sure you always maintain spine neutrality. In this video, I've given you the tools you need to squat heavy, safely, and efficiently. But don't be surprised if you're not perfect the first time. In fact, I promise you, you won't be. I'm learning and relearning every single time. Remember, practice makes perfect. Many of us don't think about lifting as a skill, but it's a skill. And the more frequently you practice it, the better you will get. So even if you're not training heavy, it can still be useful to go in, put light weight on the bar, and just do the movement. Don't neglect your warm-up sets. It's not just for you getting warm, it's also practice. The more times you do it, the better it will be ingrained in your motor pattern. Remember, if you treat lightweight like it's heavy, one day we will treat heavyweight like it's light. If you have any questions about this video or anything I've discussed, please feel free to